The recent death of Lonesome George, the last of the Pinta Island giant tortoises, is really one of many extinctions that happen every day. Can that trend be changed? Not without a change in political will. We'll talk about this issue next on Global Perspectives.
This program is made possible, in part, by funding from the UCF Global Perspectives Office, the Global Connections Foundation, and the India Center at UCF.
This is Global Perspectives with Pulitzer Prize-winning commentator John Bercia.
Welcome to Global Perspectives. What's in a death? Lonesome George, the last of the Pinta giant tortoises, recently passed away. This one death speaks volumes about our environment. Does it matter if a single island species disappears? What do severe weather events we've all been experiencing, from flooding in Asia to drought in the American heartland, really mean? And how are shifting water patterns, dubbed a global crisis by some, affecting life offshore and on? Our guest today can help us sort through these questions. Peter Pritchard, head of the Colonian Research Institute and a leading turtle and tortoise specialist, has been named a hero of the planet by Time magazine. Welcome to the show, Dr. Pritchard.
Happy to be here.
Tell us about your friend, Lonesome George.
Lonesome George is no longer with us. He was the last of the Pinta Island tortoises, and it was a tortoise that I actually had a personal obsession with from my great youth, since my parents gave me a book for Christmas that happened to be a monograph on giant tortoises published in 1883. It's a wonderful thing. I read it until it fell apart. And it identified, and it showed engravings of a tortoise of wonderful demeanor. And I thought, I want to see that animal alive. There was no indication in the book if any were still alive or not. And so I thought, I've got to make an expedition. But in those days, you didn't have money for expeditions when you were that youthful age. But I never lost that obsession. And finally, in 1971, I happened to be on Pinta Island when the last tortoise was found. And that set things off because this was a huge surprise. Everyone thought that the island species had gone extinct by about 1905 or 1906 or something like that. And here in 1971, we're privileged to see the last one. Scoured the whole island a couple of times since then. No others were found.
Others were found. So you had several decades at least to experience the last of the giant Pinta Island tortoises. What does this mean? The average person may say, oh, well, so the tortoise has passed. But what does it mean in the great scheme of things? And what does it say about us and our world?
Well, it means that we have plunged in where we did not belong. Oceanic islands, in general, have been wrecked by Homo sapiens. And there's very little we can do about it except to do the best we can with relictual things. And the Galapagos Islands actually looked terrible a few decades ago. And now that it's got tourism, a lot of people think that tourism is a mistake, and it's probably inevitable or important for Ecuador's economy to have an archipelago where the public can come and the giant tortoises can still be happy, because they have about some very high percentage of Galapagos is hands-off. And an awful lot of money is spent in conservation. And on the islands where there are still giant tortoises, and that's the majority of them, there is very, very good conservation going on. But it wasn't always the case. And George's ancestors were ruthlessly stolen from the island and packed into whaling ships. So these whaling ships could do the big circuit of the Pacific Ocean going for sperm whale oil, and they ate tortoises that might have been in the bilges of the ship for 6 months sometimes, still alive, and just pulled up one by one when they were needed for human food. On the bigger islands, the interiors were often very hard to get to, a lot of volcanic action and things like that. So it has been possible with energetic conservation to save nearly all of the different races of Galapagos tortoise. But we were a bit too late for Pinta.
Well, let's move from that specific case to the broader problem of environmental and climate change. What is your assessment of this situation? There are so many contending schools of thought, some thinking it's a dire situation, others dismissing it as a routine cycle in the history of the world. Where do you stand on this issue, and what do you think the problem is?
Well, global warming is one way of looking at it. Climate change is probably a better way of looking at it. I mean, the British would love to be a bit warmer because they spend an awful lot of money on heat. But with the melting of the snows on Kilimanjaro and of the ice caps and things like this, something bad is happening. Something major is happening. And there is a lot of warming of the Earth. It may well be tied to our use of carbon-bearing materials for almost everything we do in life. And we burn petroleum, and we burn coal, and we burn all wood. And these carbon atoms are going back into the environment and changing it. And it's going to be very hard to reverse that one. How do you get all that carbon back into out of circulation status? I'm not sure how we could do it. We think we can do it, or we have little undertakings to make us think we're really making progress. But we may have wrecked planet Earth.
So that sounds pretty dire, but it's obviously something we have to come to grips with, because if this is inevitably part of our reality and future, it's something we have to face.
Yeah. And the other thing is our very numbers. It is unknown in the history of the world for such a large species as ourselves to take over the world. I mean, even the dinosaurs took over the world for a while, but they were not one species. They were many, many dozens of species. So our species is a very guilty one, because we've done things that we had no idea what the outcomes would be. And I'm somewhat pessimistic that the big show can go on. Now, it may be that either the very violent or the very ingenious can find little niches in planet Earth where they can continue to exist and have some kind of a living. But the huge cities of the world are surely unsustainable. Something's going to happen.
Does it give you any comfort that the world's population is supposed to level off by the mid part of this century and then start to shrink?
Well, who knows how it will pan out in terms of the actual numbers. But, you know, you and I have children, and we want these children to have the very best things life can offer, and we want them to be looked after. While all the other species are subject to Darwinian selection, and some of them survive and some of them are just taken out of the system because they're the non-winners. We want everyone to win because we're a decent species. We really are. But it's a terrible thing for the globe to have everyone surviving because there just isn't room.
What is your sense of where we'll be 100, 200 years from now in both the pessimistic and optimistic scenarios?
We need to be smarter, and we probably need to change some of our political systems, but I won't get into that. But I think that there'll be places in the world that become uninhabitable, and others where people just don't want to live. And then there are places that will be more attractive. and the people will try to get there, but it'll be very competitive. We need to find little niches where each of us can survive. I will probably make sure I'm on good terms with my Arawak friends in Guyana, who I think would be very good at existing in a changing world.
So do you think if we have some continuing and severe catastrophic climate changes that the population could be reduced?
There may be food shortages, there may be all kinds of things. And I think a lot of people are trying to figure out that the plight of our planet at the moment, which is pretty bad in many ways, but we're not quite sure what to do about it.
One of the areas that has been receiving a lot of attention is the water issue, and highlighted by the fact that we seem to have an overabundance of water in some places and none in others, and this is affecting everything from the way people live to their daily comfort to crops to you name it. And is this something that will continue to be a bigger part of our future, or is that a cyclical problem?
Well, water can be purified, can be recycled. Rain comes from the sea and going through a cycle and coming down again as fresh water. So one has some hope that water problems may be solved, at least in some places. Have you been to Silver Springs lately in North Florida? Well, the wonderful spring when I first saw it 20 or 30 years ago, and now it's sort of opaque and weed infested, and that shouldn't have happened. But that was because there was too much development around it, and the wrong chemicals were flowing into it. Now a spring in a sense is self-cleansing, and a river is self-cleansing if you give it a chance, because it's flowing downhill, eventually getting to the sea. So we've got to change the land a lot in order to keep the rivers and freshwater creeks and everything functional and attractive.
What would you recommend we do about water shortages of the kind we've seen recently in the heartland of the United States? Is it wise to try to move water to those places in large quantities, or is it something we have to just give up on and as you said, move to other areas that are more hospitable?
We do try to live in places which a biologist would identify as not good habitat. Why are people trying to live in a place that is not good habitat? And possibly because they've been squeezed from places that were more productive habitat or did have better water. A big part of the answer is going to be, the water will always be with us, but the management of the water is going to be difficult, or it'll require a lot of skill and a lot of discipline.
You talk about appropriate habitat. Much of the human population lives on bodies of water for a whole variety of reasons, and now with sea level rise and everything associated with it, what do you think is going to happen to our coastal cities and farming that takes place in those areas?
Well, we have built an awful lot of stuff on the coasts of Florida, and there's quite a lot of increasing regulation as to how you do this. But more and more, we probably shouldn't be building in these places because the water will rise and inundate them. And a lot of people don't recognize that hurricanes come and they knock things over. And we really should be more protective of our shoreline, of our beaches in particular, where the sea turtles nest.
What is the worst problem with those now, based on the way we have managed or mismanaged those resources?
Well, globally, more and more, you're hearing about places that were flooded out of existence or having one catastrophe or another because of bad placing. But on the other hand, with so many human beings around, some of them inevitably are going to be badly placed, and there will be a lot of suffering. I tend to be pessimistic. I think the individuals and small communities can, through ingenuity, find a lifestyle that is adequate for them. But the hundreds of millions of the world may not be able to do that.
You've talked before about an investment every homeowner should have in this changing period. Talk about that.
What did I say?
Was it a canoe or was it a...
Well, I was just thinking in Louisiana, because it was, what, 5 or 6 years ago now, when New Orleans was flooded and a lot of people died, and people were sitting on their own rooftops desperately hoping for someone to come by. A relatively simple solution when you're in something with that kind of topography is to make everyone have a canoe. Keep it in the attic or something until needed. A simple answer to an important question.
Transportation. Transport you from rooftop to rooftop?
That sort of thing, yeah.
Okay.
If they could have just canoed somewhere else to a place outside the area of flooding, things might have been much better.
And then the opposite of that, we have parts of the world now that are being so scorched that they become uninhabitable. And the people from those areas are moving, sometimes not just internally within their respective countries, but across borders. And this is causing massive disruption in sub-Saharan Africa, for example.
Yeah, that's terrible stuff in Africa. And I have a book called African Kings. And it shows you these people in wonderful robes and looking very, very paternal. And they look like these are the leaders. That's the ones that we should be listening to, are the traditional kings of Africa, rather than the guy that has just dumped another $100 million into his bank account in Switzerland. So let's bring out the African kings again and listen to them. There's a lot of wisdom there.
Now, you said you might retreat to Guyana during this period of tumultuous change. What is it about that area that would suggest to you that it could be a refuge?
Well, not for a huge number of people.
Yeah, this is just a select few.
Yeah, this is for those who have friends in the right places. But flying over the Guianas, there are 3 Guianas in a row, you can fly over them for hours until you've flown the entire width of all 3 of the Guianas. And you didn't see anything man-made below you. You just saw forest and rivers. And you think, well, this might be important in the future. We'll try not to destroy it all. And Guyanese people don't have a great deal of money. It's not a very rich country. But it's a country that functions. And you see a lot of smiles on the face in Guyana. You really do. You've probably seen some Guyanese smiles yourself. And again, it's not a place where the economy looks like it's tremendously strong, but it's a place that is functioning. And the area I spend most of my time on is in the turtle beaches of the Northwest. And we have set up an indigenous, a project working with the Arawak people, the former turtle hunters there, to be the guys that protect the turtles. And they know how to catch fish, and they know how to grow food and things like that. So they're not dependent on shopping for being able to live in that area. And they couldn't provide for all of us, but I'm hoping they provide for me and some of my friends if things start to get catastrophic.
Catastrophic. What are just some general recommendations you would make to governments as we confront this crisis that they should think about doing, or at least start a conversation about, that might have an ameliorating effect on it?
Changing governments is a difficult thing. We should probably, I hate to be British, but a parliamentary system is better than a system where individuals present themselves. to be the head of state. If they are selected by their party in the House of whatever, I think there's a greater chance of the better man or woman being the head of state. At the moment, we reward wealth and ego. And if a man has got enough ego and enough wealth, he can be president, as it were. But that's not a good arrangement.
Do you think there are a lot of people out there who would, in the right circumstances, gladly present themselves to serve in these high positions? Because we don't seem to find them in any large quantity.
Yeah, it's difficult. All you need is one, really, one brilliant person.
Is there somebody who could be inspiring on a global basis?
Yeah, and we have had a few such people in our history, the Gandhis and people like that. Yeah, something is not working properly with our political systems. I think the fact that all of this, you've got to have sort of 8 or 9 months of disruption of life by people just running for government. And it doesn't need to take so long. If you had a week or two of telling the world what you're like, and then have the election, it'll be an improvement, a major improvement.
Why don't we come back to something positive? What's your favorite recollection of Lonesome George?
I took some pictures of him not many months ago, and he was in his enclosure where he's been living for a long time, and he got up slowly, creakily, and walked out, and gradually walked across the enclosure and settled down in the place where he intended to spend the day. And I had my camera, and I got a picture of him just sort of getting up onto his legs and then having walked a little bit, and 6 or 7 or 8 pictures of Lonesome George doing what was probably very close to his last walk.
That's the picture you'll carry with you. And thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you for being here today.
Well, happy to be here.
Thank you. And thank you. For Global Perspectives, I'm John Bercia. We'll see you next time.
This program is made possible, in part, by funding from the UCF Global Perspectives Office, the Global Connections Foundation, and the India Center at UCF.